The issue of suicide survival, I believe, is a major taboo. It's sort of equivalent to the way people used to think about cancer 30 years ago. You know, it was hush-hush, you didn't talk about it, you didn't discuss it. And I think it is a great taboo that has to be broken. A lot of terrible things happen to suicide survivors historically. They have had their estates confiscated. They have been shunned and banned and put in Coventry in many societies. They have been looked upon as the people responsible for the suicide. There's been such lack of understanding about the roles of mental illness, depression, and the condition of suicidology, which is mysterious and complicated and not easily defined. So my feeling about this program was that it was an opportunity to say some of the things that have been on my mind, and you very kindly let me insert some of my ideas. I think the more talk, the better, and the more that people understand that the therapy for getting through the survival has to do with talking about it. I did everything I could think of when my son died. I had planned on shutting down my concert touring and simply retiring because I didn't know how I could go on. And Joan Rivers, who has been so phenomenal in helping me to get through this, as well as some other people who were survivors, who are survivors, called me and said, you can't stop working. If you stop working, you're not going to make it. And actually, I found out that that was true, that my singing and my performing and being out there among people was the very, very best therapy that I could do. I continued my meditation. I already was doing it when Clark died, so I was right sort of in the flow of it, and I didn't have to find a way to meditate, and so that was fortunate. I went to survivor groups. I went to a doctor who specializes in suicide losses. I saw and read and looked at as much as I could. I went out to my family, my friends. I had ceremonies that involved the family. I talked and talked and talked and talked about it. We made sure, as people in this film have done, that our family treats it as an illness. If my son had died of cancer, there would not have been a shroud of secrecy and a shroud of shame over the suicide, over his death. If we didn't talk about it, we would prove the point that in your secrets, you can be sick, and we wanted to be as well and as healthy as possible. So that's what all of us did, and I think I must say that the recovery in the family has been very powerful, and I think is a good model for me to write about and think about, because I think it's been very healing, and I think it's also helped other people to understand some of this condition. And everyone is touched by suicide. If you begin to talk about it in a group, you'll find that almost everybody has either a personal instance or someone they knew, something in their family, maybe a grandmother that was never mourned, someone who was kind of buried. People often do their grieving a long time after the death, because now, in a more open environment, it's healthy to do that. It's a matter of mental health, our mental health. Ed Schneidman is a great gift to me. I met him. I read about him in the Los Angeles Times. A friend of mine sent me a very extensive interview with Schneidman. He talked all about his life work. He's not a person who ever had suicide in his life. He discovered suicide notes. He was asked to come in. He was a sociologist as his training. He was a doctor. And he was called into a coroner's office to look over and study some suicide notes when he was 21 or 22. He's now 87. He has spent his entire life studying suicide, treating people who are survivors and attempters, teaching. Of course, he's a professor emeritus of thanatology at the University of California, UCLA. He's a brilliant, brilliant man. His feeling is, first of all, he believes that everybody can be saved, which I think is extraordinary. He says, let me have him and I'll save him. He's a divine, intelligent, brilliant man who believes that there is something called psychache. He calls it psychache, psychological pain of such depth and such pain that it causes this, in a way, a kind of dementia in people's thinking, and that the act of suicide is the result of psychological pain. So he is a kind of an old-fashioned therapist in the sense that he doesn't go straight to chemicals and he doesn't go straight to the modern interpretations. He does not believe that suicide is linked with depression. He thinks that depression is a kind of a hijacking of the mental, emotional, and physical necessities of surviving and getting well. He says it may be a stop along the road medication, but it's not the final answer. I happen to be very different than Schneidman. You know, I have a lot of thoughts about this. I think that alcoholism contributes to many suicides. Drug addiction is very often present in suicides. My own case as a suicide survivor of my own suicide was that I think I was involved in a family dynamic of active alcoholism, and I think that had a great deal to do with my response of deciding to take a bottle of pills. There are family issues that are very important. Dr. Schneidman does what he calls a psychological autopsy. He's put a book out just recently called The Psychological Autopsy of a Suicide, his most recent book by Oxford Press, for which I wrote the introduction. Now, two different ducks you could not find as me and Schneidman. But because we come from very different places and we think together and understand each other so well, I think we have a good chance of creating a dialogue in a way that wasn't there before. And I think it's a bridge across a lot of the quick jumps to medication, which both of us feel are destructive. Now, the newspapers are only now starting to come out and say what I've known for years. You know, you talk to somebody who says, you know, oh, he killed himself. Oh, he was on a new medication. It wasn't working. I have heard that many times, as I'm sure that many of you have. And in doing continuing to look and listen and talk to people, I went to the wonderful Weil Center at New York Hospital recently at Cornell, and talked to some doctors there. And I brought up this issue. I said, when you're putting people on medication, because now they can look at the brain and see all kinds of things in terms of MRIs and imaging and computer imaging. They can tell when you're depressed, they can tell when you're happy, they can tell if you meditate, if your depression lifts and you are happy, joyous, and free. They can tell a lot of things. But predominantly, this research is intended to then structure medications which will then alter your moods. Of course, my point is, you know, if you can meditate and if you can run and change your endorphin levels, why not prescribe these things along with or side by side or in addition to or instead of medications? I said, why is it that so many people do say they've been on the wrong medication and boom, they kill themselves? Why would you give a new medication to a patient without putting them in the hospital to watch them? And these doctors said, that would be fine, but we can't get the coverage. They won't pay for it. Medical insurance won't pay for it. So there are a lot of things to be addressed. It's a complicated issue, and Schneidman brings the many worlds of the mind and of therapy into a constant place where the evidence is that this must be part of our thinking. He likes to say that the psychopharmacologists have hijacked the mind. There are really huge strides in alternative medicine. Alternative medicine has to do with dealing with depression, dealing with what we call bipolar, what we call all kinds of mental and emotional conditions, which can be treated alternatively with things that are non-harmful, that are non-toxic. I think the most important aspect of my work in survival as a survivor has been that I grow happier, I grow more in touch with my liveliness and therefore my music. I'm aware of the fact that the music itself is very healing, so it's healing to me, and it's always been healing to me and to others around me. So I was in that environment of doing something which promotes a healthier mind and body in myself, and then understanding that when I sing, it's very positive experience for other people who hear me sing. There's a self-destructive element in a lot of creativity, and I think that one of the things that has been tremendously helpful to me is the fact that I realize and recognize a lot of the dark side in myself, and I'm willing to stay on the planet and work on it, and I'm happier than I've ever been. Now that's only a result of knowing that this area of taboo, that you can't talk about it, you can't think about it, is in my life is completely erased. I mean, I think the health that I experience, I watch in other people, and I see them become more open and more willing to talk about this, and their own lives improve, as has mine, including my music and my writing of both prose and fiction and songs. So any experience, they say if it doesn't kill you, you'll get better, and you'll grow from the experience, and I think that's true of this one too.